If you've been living in the UK for the last few months, then it's been a bit...
One of the biggest decisions this country will face in our lifetimes.
Take back control.
Open door.
Economic shock.
Freedom of movement.
Scaremongering.
Deal with
Single market.
costs.
Remain.
So I thought I would try and break through all of the noise and sit down, do some research and make a video that just presented the facts. And that's what I've done. Well, sort of. When I actually sat down to find the facts, there aren't any. Because the problem is that both sides of the campaign, they're telling the truth, they're just twisting it. Sound familiar? So what I'm going to be doing instead is sitting down and looking at the arguments of both sides. They include facts and statistics, but just remember that they've all been twisted a little bit. So don't just take them with a pinch of salt, take them with a bucket. First of all, costs and business. This has been the one that I think's been thrown around the most. The EU costs us 350 million a week, or I've also heard 33.3 billion pounds a year. And if we left the EU, we would have this money free to fund the NHS or other services. Some have even said that it would be up to £100 million boost per week for the NHS. And, of course, the UK will have full control over how this money is spent. However, these figures are ignoring the benefits of the EU, and it's been estimated that it's something like £58.6 billion per year. It also can't be ignored that the UK contributes less to the EU than most countries, so it seems like we're getting a pretty good deal. Along with the costs, there's also the whole business factor, and there's a lot of concern that if we leave the EU, then we wouldn't have access to the single market anymore. Of course, there are plenty of countries that do have access to this market without being in the EU, so this is all a bit questionable. No one really knows. We could have more control over our trading and the regulations that we have to abide to by being in the EU, but it has been argued that the huge economic shock of leaving the EU would slow all economic progress. This does seem to be a pretty strong concern because just the fear of leaving Brexit has seen shares prices plummeting. When it comes to jobs, less regulation in the workplace from not being in the EU and the less migration means that we could have higher wages and have more jobs. The whole concern that if we left the EU, then we would lose all the regulations on maternity leave and holiday pay and protection in the workplace isn't necessarily true, because if we left the EU, we could keep these laws. But of course you have to ask how much we trust our government to keep these laws. Another thing with the jobs is that there's 3 million jobs that are directly linked to EU trade, and there is some concern that we would lose these jobs if we left the EU. However, there is actually no real reason to assume that all of these jobs would be lost permanently. Immigration. I would say this is the other main point of the referendum, because it was Nigel Farage banging on about immigration that got this referendum in the first place. The official figure is that there are 2.1 million EU nationals working in the UK, and that is a huge number. People are often talking about the fact that migrants are coming over here and taking our jobs and using up our benefits, though I don't know how they're doing both simultaneously. It seems to be some kind of Schrodinger's immigrant thing. The fact is, this isn't entirely true. Research has shown these migrants from the EU tend to be younger and healthier and tend to be working and paying taxes. Therefore, they contribute more financially than they take in benefits, pensions, or from the NHS. It makes sense why people are concerned at the numbers of people coming into the country. In 2014, there was the highest number on record, with a net of 184,000 coming from the EU to the UK. However, it is very important to note that there are even more non-EU migrants at 188,000. This means that even if leaving the EU meant that we could cut EU migration down to zero, we'd still have to bring in very strict border controls to actually reduce immigration. And leaving the EU probably won't help with that, because we'd probably have to agree to some kind of freedom of movement, so... yeah. Law setting. UK is being ruled by Brussels is another phrase that we keep on hearing. By being in the UK must abide by EU regulations, obviously. But the number of regulations that we actually do have to abide to is very complicated, but it could be anywhere between 13 and 62% of our laws are actually set by the EU. Therefore, the idea that the UK is being mostly ruled by the EU is it could be true, but it depends on the way you look at it. It also must be noted that the laws are aren't set willy-nilly by the EU. 16 national governments, i.e. 65% of the EU population, must agree to the laws. That said, many feel that Brussels are forcing certain laws upon the UK, and there have been many past examples of the European Court of Justice defeating the British government. Though we do have veto on the most important areas, many feel that we don't have true sovereignty. A quick note, a big point of debate has been employment laws, particularly to do with workers' rights, and a lot of these are set by the EU, but it's kind of a non-issue, because even if we did leave the EU, we could keep these rights, so we wouldn't necessarily just lose them. Education. There's quite a lot of debate about research funding. Basically, there are plans to spend about £63, that really wouldn't be a lot, £63 billion on research in the EU between 2014 and 2020. Many say that Britain are losing out because only 3% of our research is funded by the EU. And if we didn't have to pay all these membership costs, then we could take these fundings and put them into science. However, the EU allows a lot of student migration. Some of the top scientists in the UK are coming from the EU with EU grants, and there's also the Erasmus schemes that allows British students to study abroad. Though this is mostly looking at EU and UK students, international students are also a concern. In the International Student Survey, 17% of international students said that the Brexit would make the UK universities more attractive. However, 47% said it would make it less attractive. Now, these figures can be considered positive or negative depending on whether you want more students to come to the UK. Environment. I could go into quite a lot of details to do with particular policies. If you are interested in it, you can do your own research. I'm just going to give you a quick overview because there's a lot of stuff going here. Basically, the arguments are that there's a lot of EU environmental laws that are burdens on businesses and are pushing up energy prices. However, these laws aren't there for the sake of it. They are there because global warming is a thing and we don't like global warming much. Another point of debate is the Common Agricultural Policy. Many people say it's a waste of money and costs more than it benefits. There's a lot of people saying that it really supports farmers, and some say up to 73% of UK farming exports go through the EU. Defence and security. The open borders of the EU can be seen as a security risk. Though it's great for us when we want to go on holiday and we can just go wherever we want, it also means that terrorists can go wherever they want. If we left the EU, we could still work against terrorism in the same way that the US has a relationship with the EU. However, the whole open borders thing is kind of up for debate, and the Europol membership allows the sharing of intelligence and strengthens our defence against terrorism. You may have also heard about an EU army. Technically, this is possible in the legislation. However, it takes a completely unanimous vote from all 26 member states. Therefore, if UK voted no, then this couldn't happen. So yes, EU could build an army or something, but it can't really. So that is all of the main arguments. Now, I don't want you to be swayed by purely me, but for what it's worth, my opinion is that obviously we should stay in the EU. Oh my god. Stripping it back for a second just to the pure ideology and getting away from all these complicated and twisted statistics of 350 million and God knows what else. Countries are better together. There are a lot of right-wing parties gaining power in the EU at the moment, and they are trying to divide people. At a time where we have a refugee crisis that is affecting all of Europe, we can't try and separate that. We need to come together and we need to work together in a unity. Furthermore, I am greatly concerned by the Leave campaign. If you somehow haven't heard about it, you just need to do a quick Google search to find that the Leave campaign has been proven to be lying and biased and misleading. It is worrying that they don't seem to know what's going to happen. I'll link a little video below. It's technically from a biased source, but it quotes 9 separate politicians that asked what will happen when we leave the EU, and they all say, I don't know. That's not a good place. We don't. Why does anyone want to vote for something where we don't really know what's going to happen? Something that really gets to me is that the main crux of the Leave campaign is that it will give our government more control. Yet, to be honest, if you ask the vast majority of the British public if they trust our Conservative government or even like them, a lot of people are going to say no, and yet they want to give more power to our government. No thanks. The Brexiters are entirely focused on what leaving the EU can do for the UK. Now, I'm not saying that our country is perfect, but we're one of the lucky ones. We are in a developed, mostly very well-run country, and yet we're focusing entirely on what the exit can do for us. If the campaign was more about how the UK could help the rest of the world, I'd be more open to hearing about it. I think that we as a people are better than that. We aren't that selfish. So I want to stay in the EU because in my mind it seems like the obviously better decision, and also the Leave campaign have hardly endeared themselves to me. In conclusion, this is really, really, really important. Oh my god. If we stay in the EU, there are going to be huge changes to the UK-EU relationship. If we leave, well, everything's going to change. We're either going to have the next British Empire, or there's going to be an economic shock so large that we're going to be in another recession. God knows. If you're able to vote, the thing I want to say to you the most is do your research. At the moment, everything is biased. Every newspaper has a leaning, every person. There is so much out there. So what you need to do is you need to go through, get it from a variety of sources, hopefully a variety of viewpoints, and really try and pick out the gems of truth in amongst the mud of statistic twisting bias in this campaign. You shouldn't be swayed by me or any one person. Whew. Okay, so I wrote this script, these prompts, whatever you want to call them, a week ago. And what I wrote was, people are getting mentally violent about this, dangerously adamant of going one way or the other. What I meant by mentally violent was that people are getting, their words and their speeches and how they feel about it is getting very sentimental for what should be politics, and very kind of like evil and good. At time of filming this, yesterday, Joe Cox was brutally murdered, and there were reports saying that the man shouted Britain first. So this has even gone beyond mental violence. This has got physically violent now. This whole campaign it's been disgusting, and I can't wait for it to be over, to be honest. But that doesn't mean it's not important. To help you out with that, I've listed some simple breakdowns in the description. They just break down all of the different arguments. Feel free to check out the original websites of the campaigns themselves, but do bear in mind they're going to be horrifically biased, and you can basically ignore everything they say. I would really recommend BBC Reality Check. They make it very simple to find the topics that you're interested in, and then they say the arguments on both sides, and then come to a conclusion based on legitimate and independent research. And of course, the main thing of this video is vote. Oh my god, please, please, please vote, particularly if you are young. The majority of voters tend to be older, and in this campaign they are voting for a Greater Britain nostalgia. And the fact is that it's people like me, and probably the vast majority of the people watching this video, that are actually going to have to live with the repercussions of this referendum, literally for decades to come. So if you are eligible to vote, please, please do so. Though do remember, the only thing worse than a non-voter is a non-educated voter. So please, please, as I've already said, do your research and then vote. Okay, thank you for watching this very long video. I'm sorry, there was a lot of stuff to say. I hope that it's shed some light on some of the arguments and you have a slightly better idea of what's going on. I realise that the comments on this video are probably going to get quite political, so can we all just be civilised and respect each other's opinions? I would love to get some discussions going in favour of either side, because that's always useful to know the arguments. But yeah, just keep it civilised, please. I suppose I will see you on the other side of the referendum. Bye. So yesterday on the train home, I was reading this book, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf.